Olá de novo. Vou chamar então Raoul Peck, please join us the stage. Raoul Peck. Vou ler em português.
It's better if they come all forward. It's better if they can sit.
O pessoal, o Peck está convidando vocês para se aproximar. Final, né? É um encontro. E aí dá para ver também a carinha de vocês com máscara.
And move forward too.
Yes. Bom, vou usar o microfone porque aí todo mundo consegue me ouvir bem. Esse foi mais terceiro e último filme que nós exibimos, do Raoul Peck, que nos brinda com a sua presença. E eu preparei aqui um texto que é mais ou menos uma síntese do que a gente viveu essa semana. É rapidinho, tá? Só para eu não me perder. E aí eu vou ler, Peck, para eu não me perder. E tá dando? Aí, você está me ouvindo agora? Agora está me ouvindo? Eu vou ler para eu não me perder, que é uma síntese do que a gente viveu. Essa escolha desses filmes, é uma escolha também muito significativa desse seu trabalho. E esse filme também, eu acho que ele, entre outras questões, que eu acho que vem com o debate, junto com a sua obra, ele nos ajuda a entender esse cinema sem fronteiras, né? Um cineasta global que faz produções transnacionais e que viaja e ao mesmo tempo lida com temáticas como de Lumumba ou de Baldwin, que não necessariamente são heróis nacionais ligados à história, a uma história nacional, mas se perfilam dentro de uma trajetória transnacional, né? Eu acho que também um trabalho de ensinamento sobre a liberdade, né? A liberdade de construção, de posicionamento, né? Para além do campo das fronteiras. Então, é mais ou menos o seguinte que eu pensei aqui para começar a conversa. Desde a chegada de Raoul Peck em Campinas, temos tido conversas e debates instigantes. Conversas e debates públicos instigantes. Seu cinema oferece elementos estéticos que permitem ao espectador pensar sobre o repertório acumulado de imagens e sons, bem como a infinidade de textos e os discursos que esse conjunto proporciona. Assim, essa filmografia pensa a história, a memória, o campo do testemunho, justamente pelo repertório acumulado, que é investigado, inspecionado e questionado junto com o espectador. Com isso, uma atitude contínua de intervenção e invenção com essas imagens e as imagens produzidas por Raoul, em um convívio dinâmico de arquivos e encenações, fragmentos, cenas e sequências que resultam em modos subjetivos e apaixonantes de questionar o mundo que vivemos. As questões afrodiaspóricas, de poder, da colonialidade, da raça, das negritudes e branquitudes, tiveram um lugar dominante na seleção dos filmes que exibimos e debatemos. Filmes como Lumumba, A Morte do Profeta, a minissérie Exterminate All the Brutes e o longa Eu Não Sou Seu Negro, ofereceram-se assim como documentários ou, mais especificamente, filmes e ensaios, que são valiosos instrumentos de reflexão e transformação do olhar, de modos não ortodoxos de lidar com a história e a memória, de repensar profundamente o campo da representação da herança colonial, do racismo, do sexismo, enfim, eles articulam modos de ver e também questionar relações de poder. Saímos revigorados dessa experiência profunda que irá ecoar em nossas produções audiovisuais, nossas aulas, nossas pesquisas e publicações. Raoul Peck é um pensador contemporâneo que elabora intrinsecamente para que tenhamos seu pensamento como algo aliado de nossas questões. Ou seja, o Brasil ainda necessita pensar profundamente sua história marcada por massacres e genocídios, principalmente contra os povos indígenas, negros e periféricos. Raoul Peck nos ajuda a repensar o campo das imagens do século XX, em que os Estados Unidos funcionaram como um grande distribuidor de imaginários. E assim seu cinema, que podemos ver pela ótica de Peck, é também um agente disseminador de diferenças, hierarquias e naturalização de violências. Hoje vimos Eu Não Sou Seu Negro, um filme centrado na figura de James Baldwin, e o filme, de algum modo, traz as propostas dos líderes ativistas Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, todos assassinados, com questões raciais contemporâneas, né? Imbuídas nas narrativas. Trazer a voz de Baldwin parece ser o grande trabalho do filme, a textura sonora de sua voz, o seu corpo, a força do seu pensamento. Isso articulados com essas experiências da resistência negra norte-americana no contexto da luta pelos direitos civis e a emergência do Black Power. Destaco brevemente esse trabalho de recuperação e significação das imagens, que é algo do processo criativo de Raoul Peck. O filme, assim, via montagem, traz esse repertório caro, a ideologia do Jim Crow, a sustentação visual da branquitude do sonho, da brancura do sonho americano, as lutas, as resistências e os arquivos com Baldwin, entregando o que há de mais contundente de seus questionamentos, entre outros motivos. Assim, eu gostaria de começar essa conversa, em primeiro lugar, agradecendo profundamente a presença de Raoul Peck, e também de seu irmão, Herbert Peck. Cadê o Herbert? Por generosamente estarem conosco. Agradeço também a existência desses filmes, a parceria com o Mar, com a Silvia, com a do Unicamp, a presença de todo mundo, né? E, voltando aos filmes, né, agradecer a existência mesma desses filmes e o quanto são potentes para a gente pensar questões no Brasil e no mundo. E, enfim, já indo direto ao ponto, gostaria de disparar no debate a seguinte questão, né? A partir desse filme, e aí logo em seguida a gente abre também, gostaria de disparar no debate o seguinte: os modos pelas quais pensar, né, os modos pelas quais você tem articulado por diferentes abordagens os privilégios e os poderes da branquitude, suas consequências e a carga de questionamento sobre esses lugares e como isso afeta a má distribuição de riqueza, de conhecimento e de felicidade no mundo. São
Good evening, everybody. That's a big question, Joubert. First of all, maybe I should say something about how the film was created. It's again a very rare instances where such a film can be created thanks to a lot of different elements that happen and that enabled me to make it. One of the first one is the fact that I had access to all James Baldwin work. whether published, unpublished, private letters, research, drafts. And the second thing is that I had unlimited time almost to make the film. The whole process took 10 years. It did not take 10 years to make the film, but through different moment, research. Initially, it was supposed to be a fiction film. After trying different approach, trying different partners, ultimately, halfway through, I decided that I was going to make a documentary because it allowed me to be totally free, to produce it myself, not to have anybody above my shoulders, to take the time I need to make the film. And that was an important decision. And another aspect of this film is that I decided that it would not be a sort of usual documentary with interviews, with experts, with all sort of, bias approach, but to exclusively give the words to James Baldwin. Those words that have changed my own life, and I wanted to give it to the audience in the most direct way, without interference from anybody else. And that's how it started. And so all the text that you hear is exclusively Baldwin. I didn't write one single sentence. What I did is a sort of libretto, like you would do for a theater play, and take different pieces of an author or a composer and fabricate something new. And this is what I did. And so the faking is Baldwin's. And the only thing is that because Baldwin somehow raised me intellectually, so I felt very comfortable to juggle those words and to play with them. And because I knew that I would never abuse his words, that I would not make him say something that he didn't want to say. I didn't manipulate his word. So that needed a very strict discipline in what I use from his material. That's how I would answer your first question.
Pessoal, a gente já está aberto, você só levantar a mão que as pessoas levam o microfone. Podia dizer o nome de onde é.
And maybe something you say, I think, in your presentation, I never intended to make this film just for Americans. This, as Baldwin was a universal thinker, I knew by choosing each one of those sentences that my audience was universal. My audience was international. And that it at the same time needed to be an American production. I knew that it would give more credibility, whether we like it or not, but to embed this film as an American film would allow it to travel faster and deeper and on a much bigger scale. So, and I knew that's how I had to make it. And in particular, the experience I had with the film throughout the world, because I did travel many times with it, either through festivals or invitations like this one. And what I realized is that people were able to transcribe this film to their own reality. And it's the same thing. It was I was watching the last 15 minutes from the back, and being in Brazil, each word I thought is exactly the description of what is happening in Brazil. And again, that says something about the strength of Baldwin thinking.
Boa tarde, meu nome é Cristiano.
Sorry.
Boa tarde, Raoul Peck. Meu nome é Cristiano, eu sou professor do Departamento de Antropologia, colega do Omar. Eu só queria agradecer muito, muito mesmo pela sua presença essa semana aqui. Eu estou completamente encantado e, ao mesmo tempo, perturbado pelos seus filmes. E eu tenho uma pergunta, talvez relacionando mais, enfim, o filme de anteontem, de Lumumba, mas também relacionado com I'm Not Your Negro, que tem a ver com alguma coisa que você já falou anteriormente, que é o uso dos arquivos, mas também o uso da edição nos seus filmes e também o uso da câmera e também do voice-over, né? Porque o Gilberto estava falando, né, eu acho que os seus filmes fazem um trabalho incrível de trazer uma outra perspectiva sobre imagens muito conhecidas que a gente vê de uma outra maneira, né? Histórias muito conhecidas que a gente também vê de outra maneira. Agora, eu tenho uma pergunta que eu estou na minha cabeça desde que eu assisti o filme do Lumumba, que tem a ver com, como eu vou dizer, a relação entre as presenças e, ao mesmo tempo, a morte dos protagonistas homens dos seus filmes, Lumumba, enfim, os três personagens do I'm Not Your Negro, mas, ao mesmo tempo, uma outra presença que eu gostaria de te perguntar, que são das mulheres, né? Tem um outro escritor negro norte-americano que também cresceu no Harlem na década de 50, também herdeiro dos movimentos sociais, dos direitos civis nos Estados Unidos, Samuel Delany, que na autobiografia dele, do The Motion of Light in Water, fala da morte do pai, né, e da ausência do pai, mas da presença constante, né, da mãe, das irmãs e da própria esposa. E, sobretudo, em Lumumba, você lembra muito da sua mãe. Minha mãe me disse, minha mãe me contou, minha mãe me explicou. E eu gostaria de te perguntar qual que é o lugar, né, digamos, a importância, digamos, dessa voz feminina, da sua mãe especificamente, porque os seus filmes também são muito pessoais, digamos, na constituição da sua perspectiva enquanto cineasta, né, daquele menininho que pegou a câmera na torada, da primeira vez, e que disse que a única preocupação era manter, gravar em foco, né? Mas alguma coisa aconteceu depois disso, eu gostaria de te perguntar, e se tem a ver com essa presença feminina. Obrigado.
This is something that I've been not struggling with, but I make sure to always engage with, because all the work that I have to do for myself as a black man, I always try to do it at the same time for all the other people on the other side, for all the alterity. Because one of the central problems of white supremacy is not to see everybody else. So I always make sure that that I have a self-critic all the time about where are the others in my films, and make sure that, especially with films that have as subject male heroes, to make sure that all the story is told, not just the story of the hero. Because as Michel Ovstruyo have also incredibly done, is to give the whole scope of history and of who write histories and why and what is silence and not. So as a filmmaker, I have to make sure in my work that I do not silence others. So it's a constant, and it make it an additional difficulties, but because the system itself resists to that. You know, you could have a fiction film, where you try to give more room to the woman character, and that the people who gives the money say, well, but why are you insisting? Or she was not that important. You know, so it's a constant fight to assert the totality of the existing bodies and minds and people. One particular example, beside Lumumba, with my mother, is the two women in the young Karl Marx, where there was very little from historians' point of view about Jenny Marx and what's her name? Mary Burns. And me and my co-writer, we had to dig deep to find their story too. And thankfully, we discover a lot of letters that they wrote to each other. So we could develop from those letters the real roles that those two women have played, not only as wife or partners, but also as activists, also as bringing the theory to birth. And so we could, draft after draft, bring those characters not just as side character, but as well in the middle of everything. And it doesn't always succeed. I can, just for the anecdote, give you something that I did not totally succeed in doing in the young Karl Marx, is that we shot in France, in Belgium, and in Germany. And so I had casting in all those three places. And I specifically asked the person who was casting extras to make sure there is a diverse crowd. Because even in the 19th century, there were blacks in Paris, there were blacks in Germany, there were blacks everywhere. But each time, it was a battle. Every day I had to battle. And as a director, you have to battle with so many stuff. And the way it happened is that they tired you. You know, you really become tired to say that every day. And at one point they brought, you know, because there are companies that make the casting for extras. They have a catalog. So normally it's easy. You go through the catalog and you can choose 100, 200, 300 people, faces. But there are almost no black faces. So what they had to do is to go in the streets, to go to all sorts of places, student, university, to find blacks who were studying in Germany or studying in Belgium. And so they would bring back, of course, for me as a black person, I can recognize faces, you know, and the mixture they were bringing back was not utilizable, you know, because it wouldn't make sense, you know. Ethnic feature that, you know, is like bringing in a Central European film a lot of Sweden and a lot of Sicilian, you know. Those distinctions are unclear for the normal casting director. So at one point I had to put a costume myself, so at least there is one black face. And there are another young man, a black, he was a student in my film school who were visiting. I told them, put a costume on them and rehearse. Here's your text. So it's a fight, and it's the same for LGBT problems or women issues. You know, the industry is not built for that. So you have to push the walls all the time. And the way sometimes that they get you is because you become tired, because you still have a film to make, you know, so to that specific.
Foi. Boa tarde a todos. Boa tarde, Raul. Estou me ouvindo em inglês, é horrível. Primeiramente, eu gostaria de agradecer e parabenizar o Gilberto, a Sílvia e o Omar por terem proporcionado para a gente esse evento, o convite ao Raul, o Raul ter vindo com o seu irmão produtor. Muito obrigado, obrigado a todos. Raul, eu tenho uma questão muito específica para você. Eu não é o professor de cinema, eu dou aula de produção. E eu vendo o teu trabalho, especialmente esse filme especialmente, ele tem um aspecto que é uma cadeia de produção muito extensa, de imagem de arquivo. Então, eu fiquei curioso, porque, conversando com o diretor brasileiro, ele falou do problema que era você pagar arquivo, pagar os direitos autorais para as pessoas detentoras dos direitos patrimoniais e tal. E eu queria que você falasse disso, porque é um filme, me parece, caríssimo nesse aspecto, né? Bom, tem as imagens de arquivo e tem as imagens atuais. Eu imagino que essas você fez. Um outro aspecto da produção que me chamou a atenção é que é um filme que envolve 3 países, né? Embora seja inglês, embora ele tenha sido feito com uma temática muito americana, estadunidense, eu diria, acho que a temática americana nos diz respeito a todos. Mas ele tem eu acho que ele tem uma plataforma de lançamento estadunidense, que você explicitou isso aí. Eu queria saber por que você fez isso do ponto de vista da produção. Quer dizer, como é que os outros países entram? A França, se entrou dinheiro francês, e se entrou dinheiro... Se entrou e de quem? Eu imagino que foi televisão, né? Eu vi muito rapidamente, mas eu imagino que foi televisão. E se a primeira janela tua foi... A primeira janela do filme foi em cinema ou televisão, e que televisão entrou? Nesses 10 anos, como é que você preparou essa produção, que deve ter sido muito complexa? Evidentemente, o produtor está aqui, se ele quiser contar essa história também. E a questão da coprodução, né? Coprodução, como é que você lida com isso? Você tem feito várias, né? Como é que você lida essas coisas da coprodução na tua obra? Então, é uma coisa bem técnica, mas eu queria te ouvir a respeito. Obrigado.
No, it's not only technical, it's political. I used to say that to have a career of more than 40 years in an industry that did not leave a room for you, you did not exist for that industry. 90% of film industry throughout the world are basically center-right. That's the reality. Even those who say they are from the left. So I knew that I had to do something that the only analogy is to say I did guerrilla filmmaking. I went where I could hit and live. And I had to follow every film organically as a specific film. I don't do normal film in the sense that there is a model and I use the model. Every film I choose to make, I know that I have to find a particular way to make it financially, artistically, and in terms of format as well. Sometimes it's difficult to give a name to, how do you call exterminate all the brutes? For me, it's a film in 4 chapters. It's not a miniseries. It's not a docu-fiction, because that's a different way. I don't make fiction in a documentary. It's a thread, it's a narrative that is complete and thread. So specifically to I Am Not Your Negro, I started developing the project from my company. That means I'm the one paying myself, making my own research, paying a few people when it was necessary, but I control everything. And then I went to French network Arte, which is probably the best production TV for documentary and for what they called in France creative documentary. Because today everybody uses the word documentary. CNN is making documentary. Hispan is going, National Geography is doing documentary. That's not my understanding of what documentary is. Journalists make documentaries, which is nonsense. Arte is a place where I did a lot of my films, or they co-produce a lot of my films, where I have a good collaboration, where they trust my work, where sometimes I don't need to give them 60 pages of documentation for them to give me a positive answer. This is what I've done over many years. They co-produce and bought my film Lumumba, Death of a Prophet. So that was 91. So you see how long I've been collaborating with them. So I always see them as the people who allows me to start the project. But I knew in particular for I Am Not Your Negro that I would need more money. And I also wanted to embed the project in a US production company. And my company is in France and in New York. So I can use both sides. So the plan, because I had a plan, which was once I know what the film is, that I know I already edited draft of the film. And you talk about the archive. I use all the archive I could get because archives are international. I can order archive from the US, order archive from Russia. I can, you have access. Those are companies who want to make money. So you can edit. The problem will be later how to pay for them, for the rights. So the second part of the production was to start finding money in the US. Once I know I have a film, the film is solid, and I know where I'm going. It was difficult in the US because they didn't get it. And I can tell you, the draft that I had, the film was already there. But almost, I would say, 90%, if not 94.5% of the usual funding for US documentary say no to the film. Nobody wanted to invest. And one, what do you call ITVS? One institution, ITVS, where it's a process, you submit your film, there is a jury, a first selection, and then there are 3 steps, and you get to the last one, where there is a jury of filmmakers who decide what are the 10 projects they're going to fund. The first year, we got all the way to the last thing. We didn't get it. And when we get, because they sent you the discussion, and of course it didn't make sense because you had in that jury filmmakers, administrators, filmmakers who have done one film or maybe two, judging somebody like me who have been more than 40 years in the business. They didn't get the film. They lecture me on the film. I mean, I was not there, but I see what they have seen say about the cut. So we say, okay, we're going to resubmit the next year. The next year, the same. We end up on the top. New jury. We were not accepted. At that moment, because I knew all the people in the administration of that institution, and the head of the institution say, you know what, Raoul, I'm going to give you the money from another fund directly because this doesn't make sense. And it was 250,000 that was missing to finish the film. And I got them from them. And we finished the film. So the price of the archive, this is a very important question. That's why in Lumumba, Death of a Prophet, I say, this minute cost $3,500. And a Congolese earned $150 a year. So that was a way to say people in countries like Congo don't have access to their own archive. And that's a reality. It was already like this in the 90s. Today, it's even worse. Because those archives companies are totally profit-oriented, capitalist companies. What, on the other hand, that exists in the US, which was the result of fights by filmmakers, there is something we call fair use. That means if the archive makes sense in your film, you are allowed to use it without having to pay for it. That means some of the archives, let's say Doris Day, the studio could not block us because we use fair use, which is a system. I can explain to you how it works. Because I use the name Doris Day in the text, you hear the word, so I can use that. Of course, I cannot use 10 minutes of it, but I can use enough seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, because it makes sense in the film. So fair use works in that way. You choose a lawyer who is specialized in fair use. You send your edit to the lawyer and then start a discussion. He responds and say, this will not pass. This will pass if you cut it a little bit. This will pass, you're good. So the person gives you a radiography of your film, not second by second. It's very detailed. And you work back and forth with your editor. And you find ways. Sometimes I had to rewrite the text to make sure I get the fair use. It's a process of several months. And the lawyer now write a document, 30 pages at least, saying everything saying something about every second of your film, where you use archive or where you need rights. And when he finished that document, he sent it to an insurance company, which does fair use. That means once the insurance company accept the documents, you are good, nobody can sue you. So it's a long process, but for this film, I think we had at least $200,000 of fair use. Okay? That means we didn't have to pay $200,000.
Is it a US rule?
It's in the US, but if it's US archive, it becomes for the whole world. You know, a French company cannot sue you because it's US archive. And the only thing that, let's say Doris Day, I cannot ask the company, the Hollywood studio, to send me the material. I have to find it myself, meaning find a DVD and, if possible, the best quality possible, and use it. But the company will not send you the negative or a copy from the negative. And fair use is an extraordinary rules to allows you to make to use archive in your films.
Hello. Ok. Meu nome é Sabrina, sou estudante do Instituto de Artes da Unicamp. A minha pergunta vai ser um pouco passional. Obrigada pelo trabalho, primeiramente. É um trabalho extremamente necessário, mas não tem como não tocar, né, falando enquanto mulher negra, em dores que sempre, constantemente, são abertas no nosso cotidiano. E aí eu queria fazer duas perguntas. Mesmo mostrando algo tão explícito, parece que o racismo não acaba. Parece que as pessoas brancas não têm limite para parar. Então, qual é o limite para parar, mesmo diante dessa violência que até hoje ela acontece? E a minha outra pergunta é um pouco mais direcionada a você mesmo, enquanto homem negro. Como que você supera e lida com a dor do seu racismo? É importante para mim ouvir isso também.
Yes, the pain is always there, every day. But as any pain, you have to try to understand where it comes from. And one thing that Baldwin do extraordinarily good, and that's why he was my teacher in that, you have to realize the pain is not your problem, it's the problem of the other. You cannot be reduced to a victim. You cannot be reduced to a black person. The notion of black person doesn't exist. It's something they put on you. So you have to push it back. It's a sort of therapy. You know, when he says at the end, you know, he said, you know, I'm not a nigger. I'm a man. So if you need to call me a nigger, that means you need it. And if you need it, you need to ask yourself why you need that. So he turned, it's like a jujitsu thing. He turned it to the aggressor, you know? So that's how you can cope with it while you are fighting, of course. It doesn't mean that you are, you know, just say it doesn't exist. It exists every day. They make sure that you are aware of it. But you have to every day make sure that you wake up and you are a full human being. You don't wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, I'm a woman. You don't wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, I'm black. It's something that comes from the exterior. And you have to be able to place it at its right place. You know? And so it's not easy. It's It's something that you learn to do, and I channel my anger in my film. I create something productive out of it. But I don't feel threatened because I have an inner strength, because I know I am not the problem. But Baldwin says something very powerful, and I'm not sure every American ever hear it. You know, he said, if you continue to behave like this, in fact, you are a criminal. Those are strong words. You know, he's talking about the death of your inner heart. His analysis of the American white society is extremely powerful, and a lot of people should have gone in hiding. You know, what he says about the American society. You know, and I can only recommend you to read Baldwin again and again, because it's really therapy. Because he helps you to understand that you are not the problem. You know.
Peraí, vamos fazer uma hora.
Tá bom.
Tem a...
Eu?
Seu nome é?
Camila.
Camila?
Camila.
Camila ou Luca, a Verônica, e aí a gente encerra, tá bom? As perguntas. E a Michelle.
Tem.
E a professora Suzana. Aí a gente vai encerrar, tá bom? Encerra com a Suzana.
Ela também gostaria de ir, tudo bem? Entendeu?
Faz a sua pergunta aí, a gente vai...
Tá bom. Oi, eu sou a Camille. Eu gostaria de agradecer ao Raul pela presença, junto dos meus professores da Africanidades Brasileiras, que é uma matéria aqui da Unicamp. Eu gostaria de fazer um agradecimento ainda maior pelo Omar, por ter mostrado esse projeto para a gente, e a gente ter discutido isso em aula. E em uma das aulas, a gente discutiu sobre o seu filme, e eu lembro que eu cheguei a perguntar uma coisa para o Omar, que eu gostaria de perguntar para o senhor também. Antes de tudo, eu faço parte de alguns movimentos dentro da Unicamp estudantis e movimentos de luta antirracista, e eu gostaria de mencionar para o senhor o seguinte caso, que desde o início do segundo semestre, o número de casos de racismo dentro da universidade ele aumentou exponencialmente. E eu queria saber, sob a sua perspectiva, o que deve ser feito dentro da nossa universidade para o combate do racismo e também a ideia da Unicamp favorecer a ideia progressista, mas não a de permanência. E o que nós, que fazem parte de movimentos estudantis, que lutam contra o racismo diariamente, podemos fazer para permanecer dentro da nossa universidade? E como devemos resistir?
That's a difficult question. I have the feeling that you have started, so it's a good thing. What I would say as well, it's important. I mean, any movement have different moments. There is the moment of affirming your identity, which can be violent or can be excessive. In the US, the civil rights movement, and then there was the Black Power movement, which was a younger movement, and they started by saying Black Power, because it was really about affirming their identity as men, as women. The Afro all those things that were important for their identity. But then there is another step, and that was the step that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X joined before they got assassinated. It was to come from a race fight to a class fight, which is even more important, because you can have allies. Normally, poor white people should also be your allies, even though the notion of color have intoxicated them too. But you need allies to fight such a fight. And what I would say about this university, and I am encouraged, I have many talk with Omar, with many different professors, that the notion that only black students should engage in anti-racist fight should not be. Every white person should also be involved. It's not because we are black, we are specialists in racism, you know? And I have that experience. There was a time I traveled in many different US universities with the film also sometimes. And we can be in a big auditorium like this, full of people, and there is a little group of 8, 10 black students. Usually the first question is a young woman or a young man standing up and ask me exactly the same question you did ask. And my response always is to address the rest of the auditorium and say, can you explain to me why in this big auditorium, this young black woman is the one who asked that question? Explain to me. Of course, it's a long silence, because that's the problem. You know, nowadays we know there cannot be, when somebody say, I'm not a racist, that's not enough. You have to be anti-racist. You have to be active. That's what it means today. You know, after film like this one, nobody, as Baldwin says, nobody can be innocent anymore. Being innocent is being criminal. And I mean those words, because people die right now because of this. So there is no room, there is no space for being innocent. And I hope that you will not be alone, and that other people will join you. And because it's a collective fight. It cannot be your fight just as you as a young black woman. It cannot be. Otherwise it means it's going to be violent. Because after a few years, because you will be bumping on walls, you will become violent, and you will be right to become violent. That's how I see it.
Oi, boa tarde a todos, todas. Antes de mais nada, queria, claro, agradecer demais, professor Omar, Gil, todos que organizaram, né, esse encontro. Agradecer muito, usando aqui um termo dos zapatistas, a digna raiva que esses filmes nos trazem, e dizer que eles foram muito importantes para a formação dos jovens artistas, que é um trabalho urgente que a gente precisa fazer na universidade, que é a descolonização dos currículos, porque são através dos currículos que nossas histórias são contadas e perpetuadas. E queria também elogiar muito o material que está no site do filme Exterminate All the Brutes. Convido vocês a visitarem todas as perguntas e os esquemas que são feitos para discutir o filme em sala de aula. É um material precioso. E eu vejo que é um material assim de uma imensa potência pedagógica nessa transformação que tem a ver com essa pergunta que fizeram agora, né? Por que não mais pessoas nessa sala? E dizer que foi através do filme, né, que os alunos do curso de artes cênicas elaboraram todo o seu estofo sensível para encenar a peça de Aimé Césaire, A Tragédia do Rei Christophe, e entender com o coração que a Europa é indefensável. E, por último, essa pergunta, né? São duas. Alguém comentou agora há pouco ver imagens conhecidas de uma outra maneira. E eu acho fantástico a maneira com que você trabalha os contrastes entre as imagens. Como se cada imagem das quais a gente se habitua tivesse uma sombra que a sustentasse. E nesse contato com a sombra você fizesse as imagens explodirem, né? Então, isso, arquivo, imagens de arquivo e ficção, em todo esse jogo, né, que entretece arte e vida. A minha pergunta, nesse sentido, seria que nesse mundo tão cheio de imagens oferecidas pelas superfícies lisas dos celulares, como lidar com responsabilidade com esse novo alfabeto de imagens? Porque, às vezes, eu creio que a gente desaprendeu a ver o que há por trás da Doris Day. E depois, por último, essa é mais uma curiosidade, acho que dos colegas aqui que fizeram a peça sobre o Aimé Césaire, né, do Haiti, como o Haiti foi o primeiro lugar aonde Colombo chegou, o que você ainda traz, que marca do Haiti te move na tua maneira de entender toda essa tragédia que se deu desde então? Acho que eram essas as perguntas.
It's a big question. The first one about the images. There have been a tremendous evolution, a technological evolution, the last, I would say, 30 years. And it became, for filmmakers as well, a problem, how to distinguish their images with the images of millions of people with an iPhone, or even before the iPhone with the numerical cameras. And I remember even when I was in film school, it was already a problem where anybody with a camera can go out and make all sorts of photos, because it started with the photos, where a photographer was saying, because I was a photographer in Berlin while I was in film school, and I know what it means to go throughout a city for a whole day, sometimes for a whole week, to come back with 4 or 6 photos that made sense. And then I was seeing people who didn't have a clue about photos, or who didn't have a point of view to shoot hundreds of photos. And then if they find one that is good, and then that's it. But after a while, you started to see that you could always see the right photo from a great photographer, despite the technology. Because there is something that gives a photo or a painting weight, is the whole experience of the artist. And that is very difficult to fake. Or you can fake it with one picture, but you can't fake it as une œuvre, how to say, as your body of work. There will be holes. And I think that's what you can hang on when you're creating. You know, it's how do you, what you're creating, inscribe itself in your work. You know, it cannot be just, yes, you can make one thing that is extraordinary, but you can't reproduce it. You know, and you can't explain it in the continuity of your work. So, like any art, writers is the same. A novelist, you know, become better and better and better because of experience, because of writing more. It's the same for a painter, how his style evolve. You can't replace that. You know, technology can't replace that. You know, of course, there is the hype. You know, money plays a role, profit plays a role. But if you use the measurement of history, you know, it doesn't mean anything. How many great painters who made money in the 19th century and who was unknown because their work did not survive the test of time. And that's an important aspect. In my work, I try to make sure not to fabricate a product. I know there is a way I could make this and have even more audience easier, but people would watch it once and then it was finished. But I make sure that I work and make it exceptional and make it a story. People can watch this film several times because each time you enter in a story, you're not being a lecturer, you're not being, it's not, I'm not giving numbers or statistic, and you know, it's a work of art. So I make sure that there is a story, that there is an actor, there is a character. In this film is Baldwin, the character. And you follow his life, his moments, his emotions, his pain, his anger. And each time you start watching it, you enter in that story. So it's a difficult exercise because today we are in a world of facility. You know, it's easy to do stuff. And many young kids as well, you can see on the internet how they fabricate all sort of things, taking music everywhere, using images from anywhere, changing them, but you can only do that on the internet. You cannot bring it outside because it's not yours. You didn't pay the rights, you didn't, you know, other artists have done that. You can't just steal it. So you can exercise your creativity, but I don't think it's art. You know, and so we are in a time where everything is merchandised, and there is a lot of superficiality in image productions. But that means you, as an artist, you have to be even more specific, more put more work in what you're doing, and make sure that it's exceptional, that it cannot be reproduced by somebody else, that the work is yourself. It's really you. It's attached to your own DNA. If anything you do can be done by somebody else, then that means you missed something.
Boa tarde a todas e todos. Primeiramente, queria agradecer à comissão organizadora, ao Omar, Gilberto, a Silvia, e principalmente a você pelas suas falas. Está sendo incrível mesmo todos esses encontros. Eu pesquiso dentro do campo de estudos de hip-hop e eu queria fazer uma pergunta em relação a dois aspectos. A sua trajetória, você esteve em vários países, né? Acho que viu muita coisa. E, além disso, em I'm Not Your Negro, você mobiliza o Kendrick Lamar entre uma das músicas do documentário, Ontem eu estava assistindo Sometimes in April e também tem alguns momentos onde aparecem b-boys, né? E eu gostaria de saber qual a sua perspectiva quanto ao movimento hip hop. É isso, compreender um pouco o que você pensa sobre. Obrigado.
You see, that's typically academia. It's about his own field. Well, it's hip hop and music in general is part of the manifestation of our current life and where we are in history. So as a filmmaker, I'm always attentive to what's going on around me, whether it's hip hop or whether it's dance, whether it's moving images, because I need to be current. I need to feel the pulse of society, of what's going on, of people your age, people older, people younger. I read a lot. I read newspaper. I watch a lot of news. Not only in the morning, I read the New York Times, I read Le Monde, I read sometimes a German newspaper as well, because it shaped my knowledge of what's going on. Because each one of my film is about what's going on right now. I don't make film about the past. I use the past, but it's always about what is going on right now. And so, more specifically on hip hop, you know, there have been many moments in the history of this genre, and there are people I celebrated, people I respect, like Kendrick Lamar. What he writes makes sense. Some of the things I don't like because of the content, because sometimes of the easy analysis about their society. But I think he's somebody who's a great poet and a great censor of what is happening in this society. But there is a lot of exploitation in that field. You know, people that are in it for money. And not that I, condemn them of wanting to make money, especially if they come from a very poor class. But it doesn't mean that you have to turn your back to everything else. It doesn't mean that you have to be a predator, or that you have to be homophobic or against women, insulting women. So it's like any field, and also the question is who's making the money in hip hop, and who. There is another issue connected to that I'm trying to address in another film, is the question of black capitalism. Is Beyonce really a revolutionary? And that whole generation after the civil rights movement, when the whole leadership were exterminated, and what came out of that is a different world where certain black of the bourgeoisie start to say, well, it's our turn to make money. And turning back to how they got there, because people died for them to make money. So do they give enough back to their community? Or is it enough to just send money or to create a foundation? And so all those questions are unfortunately not always answered, because there is, especially in the US, where money is at the center of everything, where your identity depends on how much money you make. It's a huge problem. So, and I'm not even going into this whole thing with Kanye West and what's his name, Jay-Z contracts with the NFL and all those things that I think are critical, and where it's always, you can see the decision is always linked to making profit or not. It's not about the fight. It's not about the struggle. It's about, do I keep my company? Do I keep being a billionaire? And if I have to, go over my brothers, I will. And that's unfortunate.
Boa tarde a todos e a todas. Também quero agradecer e quero agradecer também, além de agradecer a você, ao James Baldwin, que esteve aqui conosco. E eu queria começar pelas últimas palavras dele, quando lhe perguntaram se ele era pessimista ou otimista, e ele referiu que o pessimismo é para quem trata o tema do racismo ou da supremacia branca, se a gente quiser hoje, academicamente, e o otimismo para quem quer sobreviver ao passado e construir o futuro, né? E aí eu pergunto, a minha pergunta é difícil, eu acho, o que fazer com instituições como a polícia e a justiça, que são atores da violência contra as comunidades negras e contra os homens negros, em particular? Podemos nós não ser só pessimistas? Existe alguma capacidade de ser otimista em relação à transformação dessas instituições? Seria isso.
One thing I try, and many people ask the question under that angle, is that most people in the world don't have the luxury to ask themselves, can they be pessimist or optimist? Because the reality is there every day. So I don't give myself this luxury because, first of all, I'm privileged because I'm doing something that I like. I earn a living. So when I look at what's going on in Haiti, I have friends who are right now in danger. I have friends who can't feed their family normally. I have friends who have to hide. So from where I am, I can't even allow myself to be optimist or the pessimist. It's not even a vocabulary that I can use, And the rest, a woman in Haiti who have 5 children, and she has every day to come up with a strategy to feed her children. Really a strategy to feed her children. So that's the world we are living in now. We are a minority here in this room in terms of our income. Most of the world is in dire situation. And I'm not talking only the third world. In the US, homelessness in San Francisco is incredible. Homelessness in Paris. Homelessness everywhere. The way the health system works. We had conversation about that here as well. So I think it's not the right glasses to see reality. And we cannot wait for anything. Every day is a fight. Every day you have to ask yourself, what did I do to make tomorrow better? Because again, it's the same thing about what I said before with racism. It's not a matter of the blacks or the one who are suffering to change that. Yes, it's key that they themselves punch back. But it's not going to be solved if a majority of the country or the society doesn't care. And that's why there is violence at some point, because nobody listens. And when they start to listen, it's too late because it's burning everywhere. Because you have people who have nothing more to lose. That's the history of the world. And we should have, as civilized country or as democratic countries, we should have found a better way to settle problems without going to the instance of violence. But obviously, have not learned. You know, the French Revolution was a bloody revolution. For many years, people were killed, heads were cut. Even the revolutionary heads were cut. You know, it was a huge change for the world, for the Western world in particular. But it was bloody. And so anything can happen. And today it will be even bloodier because we have more expedient weapons. We can destroy the earth. So that's where we are. So it's not, we are beyond optimist or pessimistic. It's like we are in front. Look at Brazil. You have election deniers and powerful election denier. What does that mean for democracy? Is democracy assured here? Because if it's not, it means violence. So that's the thing. We have let democracy being get old without renewal. You know, we all became consumer, and we consume democracy. We consume our vote. We vote and we let whoever we vote do the job. And we forget that the term citizen means being active in your city, in your, you know, in the Roman sense. You know, that's what a citizen is. You have rights and you have duties. And we tend to forget the duty part, you know. And you see, you know, even vaccination, people go on the street and talk about their freedom not to get vaccinated, which is totally irrational. But that's where we are.
Olá, boa tarde, quase noite já. Eu sou a Michele, eu faço parte do Diretório Central dos Estudantes aqui da Unicamp, sou estudante de Química. E é até difícil escolher qual pergunta fazer, e na verdade as perguntas foram sendo feitas também, foram inspirando reflexões, mas eu vou fazer duas, são bem rápidas. A primeira você comentou que o filme foi produzido ao longo de mais ou menos uns 10 anos, e pelo que eu estava vendo, ele foi lançado em 2016, eu não vi se antes ou depois da eleição do Trump, mas já se tinha um clima de crescimento da extrema-direita, da supremacia branca, enfim, de uma reorganização desses grupos extremistas, racistas nos Estados Unidos. E tendo sido 10 anos de produção de filme, você começou a produzir mais ou menos durante a eleição do Obama, a primeira eleição do Obama, enfim, os primeiros governos do Obama, alguma coisa assim. Então, eu fiquei pensando como é que essa conjuntura política dos Estados Unidos influenciou a produção do próprio filme, porque foi uma produção muito longa, e no final do filme, em especial, a gente começa a ver já o próprio movimento Black Lives Matter, enfim, como que esses acontecimentos na história dos Estados Unidos influenciaram a própria obra, porque, pelo menos assistindo ela e ouvindo você aqui, deu para ver que parece que ela entrou na narrativa, né, esse contexto político que estava no país. E a outra pergunta é que você é haitiano, mora na França, Estados Unidos, enfim, tem uma vivência bastante internacional. E o Baldwin ele fala muito sobre a branquitude americana e como a consciência, a elite branca americana moldou um tipo de vivência, né, uma forma de vida que depende da exploração e da opressão do mundo inteiro, principalmente das pessoas negras, das pessoas colonizadas, para se sustentar. Mas aqui no Brasil, e vendo muito o filme, eu fiquei pensando como a nossa identidade negra ela é muito diferente. Tipo assim, a gente é muito diferente. Eu, pelo menos, vendo o filme, me identifico com muita coisa, ao mesmo tempo, não me vejo em nada. Assim. Como negra brasileira, a gente passa por violências muito diferentes. O racismo se institucionalizou de forma muito diferente no Brasil. Então, a minha pergunta é, como você, tendo vivido em vários países, vê essa identidade negra, enfim, como que cada lugar e a branquitude de cada lugar influencia a própria negritude daquele lugar a se entender e se reconhecer.
Falo isso porque aqui no Brasil a nossa grande dificuldade é se reconhecer enquanto negro. Até a pergunta da Camille vai um pouco nisso. Assim, acho que o nosso desafio enquanto movimento negro na universidade é a gente conseguir se entender enquanto negro e se defender enquanto negro e trazer esse Black Power que aqui no Brasil a gente ainda não conseguiu ter esse grande momento, eu acho, no nosso movimento. Acho que é isso.
Well, to your last question, I can only say, welcome to our world. But more seriously, the first question about the temporality of making a film and history evolving. And it's indeed a real problem, but which I try to solve every day in the process by making the film in a way, and I'm also addressing to the question before, that you have to make your film unique, but also at an abstract level where it doesn't seem dated. It's not struck into actuality. Because you're a filmmaker, you're not a journalist. You're not reporting about what's happening today. You're looking at the world, at your community, at a family, and you are observing something evolving. So, and you can do a very abstract way, or you can do it in a very specific way, but you're creating something, and you are trying to create something that will survive you. You know, differently as a journalist in a newspaper, whatever he writes will disappear the next day. You know, it's about giving information. You are extracting or using information to create something more, to create a narrative, to create an emotion, or to create, you know, whatever it is you want to create. So, and you want to make sure that whatever you create will still be valuable in 1 year, in 10 years, in 50 years. So that's the difference. So very concretely, in I Am Not Your Negro, we were very far in the editing, and indeed Obama gets elected. Of course, for several days, I had to question, do I change something? Does it make the film less relevant? And then, in fact, the response was in the film itself, because in one of the archives, a white journalist asked Baldwin, because Robert Kennedy, I've said, yeah, maybe in 40 years there will be a Negro president. And a journalist asked Baldwin, what do you think of what Bobby Kennedy have said, And he said, my concern is not when we will have a black president in the United States. My concern is of what country he will be the president of. Because that's the important question. It doesn't matter if he's black, yellow, or whatever. But have the country change? The same country that will give you Donald Trump 8 years later. So that's the real question. And for me, after I realized that, I had no problem because I knew my film would still be valuable, Obama or not Obama. So that's a legitimate question, and you have to ask it every day you're working on something. You have to be attentive of what's going on and find a abstract way to include it, but without dating it, without making it, like in 10 days, it will look like it's not that important anymore. And the movement, you say that, yes, there are differences and there are common aspects in what's going on here in Brazil about racism. And one of the thing that modestly that I've been aware in those last years is how I'm looking for the right word, how the racism is so ingrained that it doesn't come out as racism. And I say that from somebody outside that has been also intoxicated by the idea that Brazil was an extraordinary melting pot of kumbaya between all type of colors and happiness and carnival. Unfortunately, that image has been sold very efficiently. And it's still, anytime you see a report about Brazil, that comes out, unless it's somebody political acute that can really see the difference. So yes, your fight is in a different situation. Your fight has particularity that it's not the same as in the US or in France or elsewhere. But you have to find your own language. You have to fight your own way to fight. You have to find your own alliances. Indeed, it's different. Your history is different. And the fight will evolve. Right now, it's really a fight about identity, and sometimes that fight can be very sectarian, which is a problem. I told the anecdote, I think 2 days ago, with a screening of I Am Not Your Negro in Paris. In the room, there was a majority of white French people, but there was, I would say, 30% of black French. And there were all the different groups. And in the Q&A, I realized that they were not really talking with each other. There were the group against police brutality, there were the group, the indigenous of the Republic, there were the group of black LGBT, and there was, at least 10, 15 different movements. And listening to their discussion, because they were responding to each other, and not so much with me, I just realized they were not talking with each other. They were isolated, each one in their little group. And that's not a way to fight for the long term. Sometimes it's necessary to have your own groups for discussion, the same way women in the 60s needed their own forum among themselves to be able to express themselves and not to be bullied or whatever. Men, always know how to keep the mic like I do, but that's just a moment in the fight. There is another moment where you feel, okay, I'm ready. I know what my identity is. I don't need to show it off each time like a flag. And I have to look for allies, because the other person is as vehement as you, believe as strong as you in its own cause. But the idea is, how can we find common goals to at least move the movement forwards? And even if we will fight 5 years from now for details, that's okay. But you don't have anything yet. The big bully is still there. So it's not the moment to say my specificity is the most important. It's important, yes. But you're having a bigger fight as well. It doesn't help you to be right about your own fight when everything else is being destroyed. So it's a difficult process. And the example of the civil rights movement in the US, that was a long process. A lot of people were left on the side, but they managed, Catholic, Jews, black, white, indigenous, they created the movement. And so far, I think it's the only best way to do that.
Raoul Peck, thank you very much for your presence, all the discussions. Obrigado a todos, a todas. A gente tem que encerrar e continuamos aí com seus filmes, pensando. Muito obrigado pela sua presença, pela presença do Herbert. Queria fazer uns agradecimentos aqui também. Agradecer à administração central, que nos ajudou a realizar esse evento, ao Ministério Público, à DERE, à PROEC, à do Unicamp, principalmente, né? E fazer um agradecimento especial a toda a equipe da diretoria, os funcionários, estagiários que estiveram aqui, e todo mundo que participou desses 3 encontros maravilhosos, intensos, profundos. Muito obrigado, e às 19 horas, seguindo a programação que a gente está em parceria com a Unicamp, tem um concerto, um show, acredito, da Banda dos Homens de Cor na Unicamp às 19 horas. Obrigado, tenham uma boa noite.
Sim.